B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comments. It's Wednesday, December 21st, 2016. Holiday greetings of every description. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa greetings, Festivus, if that's your gig, or if you are holiday free, I just hope you enjoy some downtime. And speaking of downtime, this is our last news and comment podcast for 2016. I'm going to take a break and return after the new year. We've got one in-depth interview that I'm going to also be releasing today. Details on that coming up in the podcast today. But Donald Trump is bringing new meaning to the term referencing the president called the Bully Pulpit. The idea that the president has the ability to speak publicly, to use influence and pressure and rhetoric to move things in his direction. And historically, the bully pulpit hasn't had too many real bullies in the pulpit. But when you look at Trump's his inclination to respond to minor slights, whether it's the satire on Saturday Night Live or, a Vanity Fair restaurant review or other trivial matters, we know that we have a bully in chief. And Politico today reports on the bullies who are Trump loyalists, who are essentially the political enforcers for the Trump madness that lies ahead. And as you know, Donald Trump doesn't have detailed, defined policy positions. And that makes it even more difficult for people to guess when they will be perceived as stepping out of line. So let's take a look at Congressman Bill Flores, a dedicated Republican conservative. And he politely and in a tiptoe manner gave some comments in Washington a few weeks ago. And he said that some of Trump's proposals are not going to line up very well with our conservative policies. And I think what he's referring to there is that Trump wants to cut taxes and spend money in ways that could run up the deficit. And that is a third rail for many Tea Party Republicans. And you can understand that these are obvious and known differences. So what he said was so mild that they won't line up very well with our conservative policies. But that was spun up within days by the Breitbart Sean Hannity media maw. So Breitbart spun up the comments, saying that this is proof that House Republicans plan to isolate and block President Donald Trump's populist campaign promises. A conservative blogger on Truth Feed then warned Congressman Flores to get ready for a shitstorm. And he posted a headline reading, "Breaking. Representative Bill Flores has crafted a plan to block Trump's immigration reform." Now, I quoted you Flores' comment. It wasn't about immigration. It was pretty bland and general. But these people fill in the blanks based, I guess, on their own imaginations. Then Sean Hannity jumps in, featuring the Breitbart post on his radio show. And then somebody tweeted, "Bill Flores is going to get in Trump's way, and we will burn your career down until you are reduced to selling life insurance. Bill Flores, you can go hang yourself," another one wrote. So this is leading to very timid actions and comments from Republicans who are the majority, the muscle, on Capitol Hill in both houses. And as Politico states it, they're terrified of arousing the ire of their tempestuous new leader or being labeled a turncoat by his army of followers. And Politico goes on to put it aptly, it's a novel form of party message discipline that stems from Trump but doesn't necessarily require him to speak or tweet himself, because others, plenty of them, are willing to do it for him. So you remember Mark Sanford? He's the guy who was governor of South Carolina and was bounced out of office after he took a walk on the Appalachian Trail, but he was actually jumping his mistress in South America somewhere. Well, he's reading the situation. He said, nobody wants to go first. He got nasty phone calls, letters, and tweets after he wrote an op-ed in August calling on Trump to release his tax returns. People are naturally reticent to be the first out of the block for fear of Sean Hannity, Breitbart, and I guess the Twitter bots. So this creates a very interesting situation, and I've referenced this before, that I think that Trump is going to chew up his appointees at the cabinet and sub-cabinet level. I have a bet with my brother who works for the Housing and Urban Development Department that Ben Carson probably won't last more than a year. And I think a lot of them are going to spend most of their time guessing what would please the Donald, what would piss him off, and that they will limit their behavior as a result. And let me be fair here, because I have frequently criticized Democrats who cowered in the face of Barack Obama. And I've singled out Barbara Boxer, who's just retired from the Senate representing California. And she was a full-throated critic of the wars and the surveillance and the detention policies of George W. Bush. And when a Democrat named Obama went to the White House, she and most other Democrats went silent. So some of this is all too common. But the bully aspect of Trump's persona and the people who support him is really something to be concerned about. And I don't happen to be a big fan of Kurt Eichenwald, the Newsweek reporter. During the primary, I thought that he was very biased in favor of Hillary Clinton and against Bernie Sanders. Nonetheless, he's done some good reporting at Newsweek, including recent exposés of Donald Trump's international business dealings and how they would conflict if he becomes see, there I said it again, if. I'm still in denial, friends. So get this. Kurt Eichenwald suffers from epilepsy. And some supporter of Trump either figured this out or, found out about Eichenwald's medical condition and sent a tweet with an image attached to it. The image included a strobe effect and the words, "You deserve a seizure for your posts." Now, Eichenwald received the tweet, and he did, in fact, suffer an epileptic seizure. Now, I'd never heard of this before. I certainly believe that Eichenwald's claims are accurate. He has filed an order, I guess a request with the Dallas County District Court to order Twitter to depose executives and others to find out who sent this image to him. But this is kind of scary, that the army of bullies who have been in lockstep behind Donald Trump since he descended the escalator a year and a half ago are willing to go to great lengths to silence his critics. And I think we're just seeing the opening act of that particular drama. In my San Francisco Chronicle this morning, the estimable legal reporter Bob Agelko published a piece, "Trump's Positions on Laws Stir Worry." And he opens, "From flag burning to libel, from conflicts of interest to torture, President-elect Trump has made comments in tweets, campaign orations, and calm discussions that have suggested that he either is unaware of the applicable laws or didn't care about them." And he quotes a couple of law professors. This is Pamela Karlan, Stanford. She said, "Nearly every president has probably done something that a court has later held unconstitutional, but I can't think of one who had such an across-the-board combination of ignorance, indifference, and defiance." Another Stanford professor of history and poli-sci, Jack Rakove, says he's consistently uninformed and he is consistently inconsistent. Those are both pretty accurate. And Professor Carlin signed, along with 40 other constitutional law professors, an open letter to Trump urging him to reconsider his views on several legal issues, including flag burning and freedom of the press. As you probably know, Trump, out of nowhere, tweeted that he hates flag burning and thinks that people should be punished for it. And that, of course, expresses gross ignorance of the Supreme Court precedents and rulings that say that the First Amendment protects flag burning. And the hero that Donald Trump cites, the late Antonin Scalia, helped write the controlling opinion on that. Then there's the promise to bring back waterboarding, and a hell of a lot worse, only Congress has passed a law to prevent that. Now, Trump could amend that law or have it repealed, but he couldn't just order, we hope, the resumption of torture tactics. Then there is the hardline support for the Zionist government in Israel and the plan that Trump announced at the AIPAC conference when he was pandering to American Jews last April, that he will move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, for 70 years, this has been an issue. Previous presidents have at least feigned an interest in moving the embassy to court the support of hardliners in Israel. But this is the furthest this has gotten. And with the nomination of David Friedman, Trump's bankruptcy lawyer, and a hardline pro-settlement Zionist American Jew, this can get really nasty. And already there are concerns. Israel's ambassador is trying to spin this up, saying that this would be a great step forward to peace. And the, that's Ron Dermer. And, Dermer also said it should have happened a long time ago, and the relocation would send a strong message against the delegitimization, wow, I could say it, of Israel. And this is causing great consternation among Palestinians. This would change 7 decades of American policy. And if it were part of some larger deal that led to peace, I might be able to accept it. But we're told that Jared Kushner, the Trump son-in-law, whose family charity has given money to one of the West Bank's most hardline settlements, and this guy Friedman, who's raised money for another hardline settlement, they are driving Trump's policy on this issue. And these are bully tactics that will inflame the tensions that already exist. And if you think we saw a lot of Palestinians stabbing Israelis in 2016, what kind of tactics will they use to resist this move by the United States? In the same vein, the new hardline ambassador from Israel to the United Nations, Danny Danon, has an op-ed in today's New York Times where he plays the victim card for Israel several times. And he puts this in this positive note that, hey, we've got a new Secretary General at the UN, and Israel is ready to work together on repairing the fractious relationship with the United Nations. Of course, only on its own terms. And the victim card, well, in 2015 alone, the General Assembly passed some 20 resolutions condemning Israel, far more than any other country. And get this, he says, like all truly democratic countries, Israel has always been open to legitimate constructive criticism. What kind of bullshit is this guy pushing? I mean, Israel is so defensive about honest criticism that it would prefer to suffer the impact of boycott, divestment, and sanction movements from the United States and elsewhere than to face up to the honest criticism. And the resolutions that condemn Israel are for the continued expansion of illegal settlements on Palestinian land. Israel is a rogue state, but it is trying to redefine itself by saying that if the United Nations meets its terms, that everybody can get along. It is deeply insulting, and it can only, in my view, lead to greater conflict. Meanwhile, the Trump kids announced and then retracted within a 24-hour period a plan to raise money and give it to a charity in exchange for access to Donald Trump and his 2 adult kids, Don Jr. and Eric. Now, this is clearly based on the blueprint provided by the Clinton Foundation, where you put the money over there, but the influence is clearly linked to the money that was coughed up. Now, the Trump boys announced the development of a new charity, a nonprofit called the Opening Day Foundation. We think that's related to the opening day of hunting season. And they said that for $500,000 or even $1 million given to that charity, they would arrange a meeting with Donald Trump on the day after his inauguration and line up a hunting trip with Donald Jr. and Eric sometime in the future. So they have since announced that they are eliminating the offer for the hunting and for the private reception with the orange one, and that Eric and Donald will be removed as members of the board of the Opening Day Foundation or nonprofit. But just the idea that they would even attempt this and announce this shows how tone-deaf they truly are to the obvious conflicts of interest that already exist and can only get worse. Now, I do have one little bit of good news from the Trump file today, and that is that the Trump organization has made some moves to end standoffs with labor unions at properties in Washington, D.C. and Las Vegas. At the Trump International Las Vegas, they have signed a union contract through the 2021 year, and it allows Unite Here to represent the workers at that hotel. It includes raises all the way through 2021, and it provides pension, health benefits, job protections. It appears to be a real union contract. And in Washington, where that hotel just opened, the organizing of union of people who want to have a union among the employees has been smoothed by an agreement that will allow a card check. And if you don't know how organizing works, you pass around cards, people sign them, and if you get a majority of the employee group to sign a card, then the employer is required to negotiate with the collective bargaining unit. So this is progress, and I'm happy to see that the Trumps at least recognize that they got to get this off the table, just like the Trump University lawsuit, to avoid deeper conflicts down the road, because Trump has the power to appoint all of the members of the National Labor Relations Board, which is the kind of ultimate authority below the courts for labor and management disputes. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And here at the end of the year, I want to thank the people who have been so generous. And I can't name all the names. I don't have a list in front of me. But there are many of you who have multiple subscriptions, who have supported me in many different ways by recruiting friends to get subscriptions. Faith, you know who you are. Faith has responded, and we're going to set up a gift subscription for, I believe it's her brother-in-law. And if you'd like a gift subscription set up, it's not too late. You can just drop me a note, peter@peterbcollins.com, and we'll get it set up for you. But it really means a lot to me that people are willing to give me $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription to support the work that I do. I don't make a lot of money doing this. I do have other means of support, so don't feel sorry for me. But I do this as a labor of love, and I do hope that someday podcasting will be a profitable venture where I could make a decent living and not have to do the other things that I do to generate income. But until then, I'm going to keep talking, and I hope you'll keep supporting my work. Go to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu button, then click on the link that says Become a Subscriber, and you can pick the level of your support. You can make a one-time contribution. If you're allergic to PayPal, my mailing address, the P.O. Box, is listed on the sign-up page, and you're welcome to make a one-time contribution if that's what you would like to do. President Obama made an important announcement yesterday, citing an obscure provision of a 1953 law called the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. He has announced a permanent ban on offshore oil and gas drilling along wide areas of the Arctic and the Atlantic seaboard. Now, I haven't yet seen a map, and while I applaud this move, and the lawyers say that it's going to be very hard for Donald Trump to overturn this, I am still reeling from the fact that Obama approved offshore drilling along the Atlantic coast and in many areas of the Gulf, even after the massive blowout of the Deepwater Horizon rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And so he has bobbed and weaved on these issues. He's working on legacy. He's trying to prevent Trump from doing even worse things in the future. But I have to be honest that the rhetoric and the actions of Barack Obama have not always matched, particularly when it comes to resource extraction and burning the carbon to generate energy. Today I'm releasing to subscribers and all of our outlets a new interview, our last in-depth interview of the year. My guest today is Richard Keihin. And he was a photo editor for many years at the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper. And he and a colleague, Michael Williams, accessed an archive of photographs from the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. They've published a book that is rich with these photos and important accompanying texts. It's called Un-American. And in my interview with Rich Keihin, we talk about the plight of Japanese Americans. 110,000 were rounded up and sent to these prison camps for 2.5 or 3 years during World War II. It was one of the lowest moments, I would say, that slavery and the way we treated Chinese Americans, described them as a yellow peril, around the turn of the 20th century. This Japanese internment goes along those lines. And this is a virus that may be revived, resuscitated, and we'll see a virulent strain of it if Donald Trump follows through on his selective immigration bans for Muslims. Here's an excerpt from my conversation about the book Un-American with Rich Keihin.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes this book so relevant today. There's already been talk by Trump supporters that the incarceration, or they wouldn't use the word incarceration, they use the word internment, is the precedent for the Muslim registry, the idea of having Muslims register. I agree with him, but it's a bad precedent. And all you have to do is look at this book and understand how wrong it was. You can argue that security measures might have been necessary. The war was a very frightful time. But the one thing that I don't think you can argue is that what we did was un-American. And I think that the moment you separate Americans and you say to some Muslims, you have to register and you people don't have to register, that's an un-American act, because we are the society of people mixed together. And once you start separating us, it's just not who we are as a democracy. And I think you can really see that from this book, what can happen. And it happens, it happens so quickly. There was the United States government in the 1980s really studied the incarceration, and they came up with 3 reasons for it. One was war hysteria that we talked about, and one was a real racist feeling against Japanese, and the third one was the role of a lack of leadership. And those are things that you have to look out for very carefully.
There's a lot more in the interview with Rich Keihin, including how he fingers Earl Warren, who was the Republican governor of California during World War II, and made some of the most racist, hate-filled comments about Japanese Americans, and fed the hysteria in ways that you would not link to his role later in life on the United States Supreme Court. There's a lot in the interview. I hope you'll check it out. Kevin Gosztola is continuing his series of recaps of the Obama legacy at Shadowproof, and today's installment deals with indefinite military detention, the killer capture policy, and related matters. And Gosztola notes that the Obama administration will pass on a legal regime that enables the president to indefinitely hold alleged terrorism suspects in military detention away from any battlefield, including Americans in the United States accused of links to terrorism. This came out of the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. We covered that in detail. If you're not familiar with it, Google ND or go to the search window at peterbcollins.com and enter NDAA. We conducted a number of interviews, including with Carl Mayer, the attorney, who brought a lawsuit against the government over it. And these are very important issues that have largely, dropped off your radar. But the indefinite detention clause there is still problematic, and Obama's murky role in the development of that is still, I think, a liability for him. But Gosztola also raises the question about the kill or capture policy. And Obama, who to his credit did not bring any new prisoners to Guantanamo, nevertheless killed many people who might have been captured and held in a brig or a prison somewhere. And it does beg the question, is detention the equivalent of assassination? Well, I don't think so. And I do appreciate that Obama appears to have put an end to torture and that he tried to close Guantanamo. But as Gostola points out, he kept the prison at Parwan, Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan, open, refused to even identify who was being held there. We understand there are about 60 captives who remain there. And it's just been a complete blackout on them ever since Obama became president. Following the shooting death of the Russian diplomat, the ambassador to Turkey, on Monday in Ankara, President of Turkey Erdogan is jumping to the conclusion that the killer was motivated by Fethullah Gulen. Gulen is this Turkish imam who's in exile in Pennsylvania. He may be a CIA asset. Erdogan has blamed Gulen for the attempted coup on July 15th of this year and has demanded that the U.S. extradite him to Turkey. Now, there appears to be scant evidence that this guy is aligned with Gulen, but that doesn't stop Erdogan. There is no reason to hide that he's a member of the FETÖ network, referring to the acronym for Gulen's organization. And, we know that over 100,000 people have either lost their jobs or been locked up since July 15th. Erdogan has no credibility on this issue, but partly because of Donald Trump's business interests in Turkey, he may cough up Gulen, where Obama has been at least slow-walking the process. And the attack in Berlin that left 12 people dead after a truck mowed them down is still unresolved. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility, and authorities in Germany are searching for a Tunisian man who has been denied asylum and was scheduled to be deported sometime in the next few days. He's been identified as a Tunisian exile, and let me get his name for you here. Anis Amri is his name. He has been under watch lists and under surveillance. They arrested him once recently and had to let him go. They said they didn't have enough to charge him with. And again, I'm content to wait and see what the investigation leads to before we start inflaming anti-Islamic tensions in Germany and around the world. But this also shows that police-state activities and excessive surveillance can't necessarily prevent this kind of an attack from occurring. And so we will wait to see. It's one of those questionable moments that I think requires skepticism. They're saying that his identity card was found in the truck in Berlin. The truck had been hijacked and the Polish driver shot dead before it was driven into the crowd and mowed down a whole bunch of people. But we have, on the one hand, Trump, and across the globe, Erdogan, quick to pull the trigger and blame people whether the evidence is there or not. Here in San Francisco, Uber is in conflict with state law. They are test driving robot cars on the streets of San Francisco. Now, the cars have a human behind the wheel, but the human is not operating them. And we've had several incidents, including a case where a man witnessed a driverless car with two Uber operators in it that stopped at a red light at 5 o'clock in the morning in downtown San Francisco. And before the light turned green, the vehicle suddenly took off. It entered the intersection, and an accident with a vehicle that did have the green light was narrowly averted. So, I do understand that it takes a while to work out the bugs, and I think ultimately we will trust driverless cars. But it is still in its infancy, and Uber is this very aggressive bully organization that is kind of saying, we'll deal with this later. The law is just in our way, and we're too cool, we're too big, we're Uber, we're disruptive. And there are other incidents where, because in between the traffic lane and the curb, there's a bicycle lane, that these autonomous vehicles are having problems identifying pedestrians or bikes that are in that bike lane before they're making a right-hand turn. So, as I say, these are bugs that could be worked out, but the arrogance and the defiance of Uber is not in anyone's interest. When you have a little time during the holiday, I'd like you to read a piece that Tracy Rosenberg, who's the executive director of a nonprofit in San Francisco called Media Alliance, just published at the Utne Reader. It is a revealing story about the vertical integration of domestic law enforcement. And you know about the fusion centers. These are run by the Department of Homeland Security. They're supposed to coordinate law enforcement between local cops and the feds. But what we see is the 78 national fusion centers are collecting lots of data on innocent people that they hold on to until a computer tells them, hey, this is a suspicious situation and you better investigate. And this leads to what is called a SAR. An SAR is a suspicious activity report. And there are thousands of them created every year, and less than 5% of them merit any investigation whatsoever. And some of these are laughable. In Missouri, the Fusion Center opened a file on third-party voters as potential terrorism threats. In North Texas, a Fusion Center had a threat category called Muslim lobbyists. And in Maryland, the state police opened a file on anti-death penalty activists. So this is mission creep of a very pronounced level. And we're told that this is all to protect us from terrorism, international terrorism, the Islamic State, and all that. But this is a bureaucracy that has grown, that feeds on itself, that is unaccountable, and there is no effort by Congress or the courts to rein in this activity. It's also a huge waste of money. Up to $1.4 billion a year is being spent on these fusion centers. Here in California, we have one in Orange County, one in Los Angeles, one in Sacramento, another in Tuolumne County, another in San Diego, and one in San Francisco's Federal Building. And when Rosenberg tried to get a tour of the San Francisco Fusion Center, here it is, she called them 13 times, she emailed them 17 times, and only once did somebody pick up the phone. And when they found out what she was asking for, they hung up. Those are your tax dollars at work, friends. There is some encouraging news nationally, and that is that the death penalty is declining in both its use and in its popularity. Death sentences declined to the historic low in 2016, dropping 39% from the record low established this year. There will be 30 death sentences handed down in the U.S. this year, which is an all-time low. There were only 20 actual executions this year, and of course Texas is number one and Georgia was number two. Combined, those two states account for 80% of all American executions. And here in California, voters rejected a ballot measure to end the death penalty and narrowly, by 0.5%, passed a competing ballot measure called Prop 66 that is purported to speed up the death penalty appeal process and limit the number of appeals that a prisoner is entitled to. Just yesterday, the California Supreme Court put a stay on Prop 66 until it can hear arguments on cases that have been brought challenging it. And finally today, as I end my final podcast for this year, I want to put out another call for President Obama to pardon Leonard Peltier. And it's interesting, at a holiday party last weekend, I'm not going to drop names here, but I met a man who is going to be at the White House after the New Year's break. And he told me he's been invited to a reception with President Obama. And he said, if you could ask him for something, Peter, what would it be? And I said, well, if it's just one thing, it would be to pardon Leonard Peltier. He has been a political prisoner since 1975. And if you got room for more, you can add Don Siegelman, the governor of Alabama, who remains incarcerated in federal prison. He's a former governor. And I would add Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. I have no idea if the president will actually hear my plea, but I offer it anyway in the hope that the guy who campaigned on bringing us hope will do the right thing. Season's greetings to you. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and thanks for everything. Without you, I'd just be talking to myself.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.